All right, we are now live. This is Through the Pines, a financial planning podcast with a down-to-earth vibe even Sasquatch would scare the poor trick-or-treaters for. We are back again, and we have a scary good Money Moves podcast for you this evening. And so we are live. We can see your comments. So those of you watching, if you'd like to chime in, this podcast episode, this one's a fun one because we get to talk about issues, like real world issues that people are having. And so these are, I hear they're client issues. And so we have Rex Baxter, Brandon Smith, Dan Nelson. You can hear more about these financial planners at planwithbaxter.com, or look that up if you would like some more information on Rex, Brandon, and Dan. Let's jump right into some of these cold cases. Scary good money moves. What are we doing? Okay, so here's a scenario. I've been working with the government entity and they are not paying into Social Security. How in the world does that work? Wait a minute. That's a thing?
That is a thing, Brandon. Yeah. So this is my favorite time of year, I must say, spooky season, Halloween season. And so we're really excited to do this podcast today and kind of look at different client concerns, issues, things that we've been working on for a little while here in the past. And so everything will remain nameless. And yep. So, but yeah, there's a lot of people that work for the government, for different areas of the government, whether it be law enforcement, whether it be the railroad, whether it be different areas that particular government entity does not pay into Social Security. And that's because they have their own pension plan or their own retirement plan, and they've received exemption from the government, and so they pay directly into their own pension and retirement plan. And because they're not paying into Social Security, that reduces the benefit that those employees will get from Social Security because it's not getting paid in.
So the government exempts the government.
Now, Brandon, you're going to start a conspiracy theory if we're not careful.
I'm just asking a question. But it makes sense. They can do what they want. They're in charge of themselves, I guess. Okay.
Yeah. So there's different government programs that are out there where they'll have a government pension. And so this last month or so, we were working on a particular case with a set of clients. And so lots of times when we're going through financial planning, we'll have clients pull up their Social Security records, right? And so they can go to ssa.gov or myssa.gov, create a login, they'll ask you your security questions, and you can go back and look at all of your earnings history from the first time that you received a W-2, which, talk about spooky season. I went and looked at what I earned when I was in high school, and you and I were climbing, Brandon.
Was it 350, 375, or 425, something like that was minimum?
Yeah, I think minimum wage was $4.25 back then. I mean, Dan, what was minimum wage when you started in the business?
I believe it was $2.25, but I could be wrong. It was less than $4.25. I know that. Yeah,
so it's I mean, that's interesting. So it went from $2. I remember when my dad was young and not young, but just getting married. I think minimum wage was like $1.50 or $2 at that time too. So anyhow, minimum wage has increased over the years. But as you go to that Social Security website, you can look at all of your earnings history and see what's been paid in, how much you've paid in, how much your employer's paid in Social Security, and double check to make sure that your earnings record is accurate. Because, believe it or not, we find that sometimes they've made an error, or sometimes something hasn't been reported correctly on your Social Security earnings record. And that can have an impact depending upon how misreported it was or how big it was. That can have an impact on your Social Security. So with this particular client, we went back and looked, and they had Social Security earnings for a couple of years, then a lot of zeros, and then a couple more Social Security earnings for a couple of years, and then a lot of zeros. And then the last couple of years, they've got a couple more. So they've actually qualified for a Social Security benefit at this point, but they've also qualified for this government pension as well that they get. And so because Social Security and the government doesn't want you to double dip, into Social Security benefits and the pension. And then they came up with this program a number of years ago called a windfall elimination provision, or a WEP for short, a WEP.
Yeah, everybody knows about this.
Everybody's heard about the WEP, right? So
that's a different podcast. Yeah.
Maybe that's a different podcast. So the windfall elimination provision. And so, what we have to do as advisors, we have to go through, figure out what their pension estimates are, which lots of times the government won't give you until you're close to retirement. So lots of times you can't get a government pension estimate until you're over 60 or you're, within a year or two of retirement. So we get the pension estimate, and then you have to go through and input all of those earnings history for those people to find out how much of a reduced Social Security benefit you're going to get. So in this case, when they just received their statement, it said, oh, I'm going to receive $2,000, for instance, in Social Security. And so they were taking that at face value and kind of planning on that for retirement. But then when we got into it, the reality was that because their government pension, their Social Security benefits getting reduced by almost 50%. And so they're not really getting $2,000. Social Security is going to reduce that down to $1,000 in this example. And then that gets added to their windfall elimination program of their government pension. And so in this particular situation, that may put off their retirement date by 2 or 3 years that they need to work, because now they're not going to get that extra $1,200 or $12,000 a year of Social Security benefits. So it's a big deal. I'm not sure what percentage, I probably should have looked that up. I'm not sure what percentage of the population this program affects. I'd heard numbers around 20%, but you know how statistics are, that most percentages are made up on the spot. And so I'm not going to go with that.
There's a 100% chance that is true. This is why you listen to podcasts like this, because who the hell knows about the windfall elimination provision, honestly? I mean,
Dan, you've been in the industry, longer than the rest of us by a year or two. And so how frequently have you come across something like this, or even your clients getting a government pension and paying attention to Social Security and what they're going to get?
Very seldom, actually. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does happen, it's very important, especially to that particular client. And so when we went through this with a client, Rex and I went through this with a client in Brandon, we pointed this out, talked through it. We're still talking through it, trying to determine what do we do from here, and how do we look at this going forward, as far as maybe upping the savings rate, maybe working a year or two longer, maybe looking at lifestyle. And so it becomes an interesting conversation, something you need to know about way before you get a month from retirement. So in this case, we're in good shape that way.
I really like this next question because it involves cash and a lot of it. So the question would be, I have a large amount of cash. How and when do I get into the market? I think we had a rough last week or two. So, what is dollar cost averaging? I mean, I know what it is, but let's remind people versus lump sum. What's the best way to do it? And why does this person have a large amount of cash, most importantly? Brandon.
We don't ask questions. That's not true,
part.
Actually.
Scary part. Here's the good part.
Just kidding. We do ask questions.
Okay.
But no. So there's the thing called dollar cost averaging, and dollar cost averaging is highly beneficial, especially when you're contributing to 401ks. And essentially, in a nutshell, what it is if you add a set dollar amount, let's call it $100 every month to an account, what's going to happen is as the markets go up, right, if it jumps higher, you're actually going to buy fewer shares while the market's high. But then at the same time, that same $100, maybe the next month, if the market drops, you're going to buy a significantly more amount of shares. And so as the market goes up and down, even if the market stays flat and it's just going up and down, up and down, up and down across the line, and you're adding $100, even if the market doesn't end higher than it started, your dollar amount actually, I mean, it increases, right? Because of dollar cost averaging, your average buy-in price per share is less than it would be if you had bought, the same amount of shares. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I like the phrase that Tesla's on sale or something or whatever. So you're buying in when something is lower. It's easier to digest instead of saying, "Oh, I'm losing money." It's like, well, you're getting these on sale. That assumes that later it'll be worth more.
Right. No, that's exactly. It's a perfect way to help our human psychology that wants to buy high and sell low. It helps us automatically, this dollar cost averaging, over time we're going to end up buying more shares at lower and less shares at higher. And so dollar cost averaging is a very beneficial and important part of most financial plans. However, the question becomes, if you come across a large amount of money for any number of reasons, legal, of course, but if you come across a large amount of money and you need to invest that in the market, how do we do it, right? Do we dollar cost average that in over a year and put, a 12th, the 12th, the 12th, and we just add it in? Do we put a bunch, just all of it up front? Or do we do, segments? And the answer to that, Brandon, I think you'll like this, is it depends.
Oh, I love that answer so much.
Yeah. Just kidding. But there have been, I was reading a paper where they said, it obviously, it depends on what the markets are going to do, right? And hindsight's 2020. Unfortunately, we don't have a crystal ball. However, assuming that the markets are typically steadily moving upward, it actually usually makes sense from a statistical standpoint to actually take that lump sum and put it in all at once. Now
would you do that like tomorrow?
Tomorrow would actually be a good time to do that with the market. Yeah. But it's harder. That's easier said than done, right? Just because the emotions of taking a large sum of money, dropping it in the market, and then, the next day, of course, you're going to watch what the market did. And if it's down 3%, you're going to say, what on earth did I do? And so sometimes with clients, we'll kind of split that up and we'll maybe put in a large sum now. We'll wait a month, wait a couple weeks, wait a couple months, add another portion to help the emotional aspect of it. But statistically speaking, if your stomach can handle it, a lot of times it makes the most sense to put it in all up front. Now, obviously, it's good to consider what markets are doing, momentums, things like that. But I think as far as a general topic, those are some good things just to think about.
Dan?
Yeah, one of the things I think about having to do with, do I invest now or do I invest in a dollar cost averaging, or do I invest a little bit at a time? A lot of that might have to do with your age also. If you're early in life and you've got 20 years or 30 years before you're going to use that money or need that money, there's nothing wrong with getting that money invested, because over a period of time, the markets are always going to do better than just sitting in cash. Where did this lump sum, a large amount of money, come from? I know there was a lot of people in February of 2020, towards the end of February, were scared to death. And a lot of people were liquidating everything out of the market, or trying, at least taking some money out of the market. Some of those people never got back in because it went up so fast. And so that money might be sitting there on the sidelines. One of the things that I've noticed over the years in my experience is the best time to put money to work is when you least want to. And when the fear is the highest, that's usually, my gut reaction is, when the fear is the highest, that's the best time to start putting some money to work. In other words, if you've got a large amount of money and the market's down 10 days in a row and you're saying, wow, I am scared to death, that's usually a good time to put 30% of that to work. And then wait and see what happens. If it goes a little bit lower, then you put another 30% to work. And then eventually that market's going to come back up.
Dan, what are you seeing right now? How are people feeling as of October 5th, 2021?
I think there's a lot of fear out there right now. I think everybody is a little bit concerned about all the money that's being spent by government. The fact that the stuff going on in Washington, D.C. is not good on either side of the aisle. And a lot of concern over rapid, what They look at the gas pump and they see how much gas is. They look at the grocery store. They look at the real estate to buy a home or to look at a lot, and they see the prices of some of the real estate around, especially around Utah and other parts of the country. I think there is a lot of fear going on right now. So it's a time when the markets have not been straight up over the last 6 months. In fact, there's a lot of sectors of the market that have had a correction. And so it's a good time to be looking at that and determine, based on your age, based on your investment experience, based on your objectives and your risk tolerance, how do I get back into the market with some of the cash that's on the sidelines?
Yeah. And then, Dan, you touched a little bit on inflation, and that's the scary part. Can inflation be good for your investments? Or is there anything good to come out of inflation, maybe?
In my experience, if inflation hits us very fast and very hard, it's not good. It's not good for anybody or anything. If inflation is projected and it's coming out over a period of time and showing up over a period of time, and the rates are moderately going up in a relatively easy manner, there is certain assets that will do better with inflation. Real estate type assets do or perform better with inflation, where bonds might not. Some stocks, where they are dividend paying stocks, they might perform well in inflationary times. That's, again, the most important thing, is to get a financial planner and a good investment professional to help you with those types of decisions.
Yeah. All right. Anything else on inflation? I mean, inflation's been a pretty popular topic right now. What's it called? Not the cost of living. What's it when you make money, but the money, your income goes up? It's not keeping up with the cost of living right now, whatever that is. So, Brandon, Rex, you have a comment on that?
Yeah. So I would add on top of Dan and echo him, right, that we had a great example of rapid inflation back in the early 80s, right? Dan starting his career back then, and you had inflation hit record peaks to where you're dealing with mortgage rates of 16% or 17 or 18%, and CDs and savings accounts and bonds are paying you 12, 13, 14% in those instruments. But it raised so rapidly from the late 70s, from 78, 79. It started with kind of the oil issues back in the late 70s. And then it went and just took off and increased all the way through about 84, 85 before it kind of started to at least flatline and maybe reduce a little bit. And if you go through a period like that, it is devastating because your income doesn't keep up with it. And so all these goods and services are increasing so much faster than your income that then your standard of living just decreases significantly. I think after that time period, we went through a number of ups and downs in inflation that were very moderate and very mild. So a lot of people today, especially kind of the millennials, the X generation, they don't really have that history or that knowledge to kind of rely on. And so they're very scared of high inflation rates. But if inflation just kind of slowly increases and the Federal Reserve is successful in trying to moderate that, which they have a checkered past, right, as far as being successful at that or not. But if they're successful at being able to do that, then inflation is not necessarily an all bad thing in moderation, because that will increase the investments, that will increase, the real estate and a number of those other assets, because the profit margins kind of sit on top of that. But if you're not investing in any of those instruments, then it can be painful because you may or may not have the wage increases significant enough to keep up with that. And so I think that the inflation question is a great question. I don't think anybody can predict the future as far as what's going to happen. We're hearing a lot of opinions about what's causing the inflation today, how long is it going to last, how fast is it going to go, and you can just about find an opinion to support anything that you want to right now in through your reading. And so I think you need to read both sides of that, not panic, and get back into that kind of behavioral finance that Dan was referencing earlier as well, in that, Warren Buffett was saying that, you want to be, greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy. And that's probably the truest behavioral finance statement that's out there that's still true today. It's one of those truisms. And people don't do that. And so because of that, they, like Brandon was saying, is a lump sum, you put it in and all of a sudden it drops by 3% or 5%. And they think, oh, that's Murphy's Law, right? I put the money in, next day it's going to go down. And so, one of two things are going to happen. Either I'm going to panic out and sell because I feel like I made a rash decision, or I'm going to end up riding through it and regret that decision. And that can influence your future decisions on how you handle money. And so I think it's important for people to take a step back, think about what the real purpose of the money is, and think about when am I really going to need it, and making sure that they structure their portfolios in a way that they always have a place to pull from in the times when they think that they're going to need money. And I think that that's something that people aren't really paying attention to. And I think it's easy to get lulled to sleep over the last decade of a rising market to where they're probably taking more risk today than they realize. And if the market does roll over, because they're taking more risk, that's going to be more pain along the way. And so I think it's important that people constantly evaluate the aggressiveness of their portfolio and their money as they're looking at whether they're putting new money to work all at once or over time. So,
yeah. Brandon, do you have SMORE numbers on this, by the way?
I do. But before the numbers, I'm going to, little cliffhanger. Just kidding. But I think adding to what Rex says, we can't predict the future. However, we can do a fairly decent job stress testing your plan against the future, right? Looking at your plan and saying, what happens in a high inflationary environment, right? How do your different assets react and act? And so often people are terrified of inflation when there's some good things that come out. Your home values go up. Does your mortgage go up? No, right? Does your income go up? It should. Right. And so it's not all bad. It's just important to make sure we understand which asset classes really struggle. And those are typically cash derived asset classes. So cash in the bank, CDs, fixed income, bonds, things like that. Now to the SMORE numbers.
SMORE numbers. All right.
Speaking of
it's getting hot here.
Cheap money. So the yield on the 10-year Treasury note closed at 1.303 in end of August of this year. So about 1.3%. That's up from 0.913 as of the end of 2020. But the all-time low was 0.5, so about a half, 0.501. That was, in the middle of the pandemic, so March 9th of 2020. So I don't know, there's a lot of takeaways from that, but it is kind of interesting, how low rates were, and then they dropped even lower, and so they're now still fairly low.
Yeah, Rex?
Yeah, so I that's a great SMORE numbers. So Brandon and I didn't talk about this before, but I think it's really interesting to know that there's 4 countries out there right now, and there may be more, but there's 4 countries out there right now that have a negative yield on 1-year money, and 2 countries out there right now that have a negative yield, actually 3 countries that have negative yield on 7-year money. So you tie your money up in a 7-year bond or a 7-year CD, and if you're tying it up in France or Germany or Japan, you're guaranteeing yourself a loss of principal in those countries.
Yeah, why the hell would you do that then? Like what?
So you wouldn't, right? And so the money, right now, believe it or not, the US of the developed countries out there has one of the highest yields on 1-year money. And I would let you guess, Brandon, but I'm not sure that you would guess what the yield on a 1-year money right now on a government bond is right now, but it's 0.08 in case you were curious.
I would not have guessed that number. No.
So it's pretty low as far as that goes.
I don't think it'll happen because we always figure out ways. But what happens if we default on the debt? Does that affect that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So that would affect a lot of things in the economy if people around the world felt like the U.S. was not going to pay on their debt. And that's what the big concern is about the national debt right now, right? Is it's growing at such a pace. Are we going to be able to continue to pay the interest payments on that national debt? And that's what the concern is.
I heard.
And so at some point it's got to get
coin or something to just make it all go away.
I can't mint a coin.
You can't
to do that. No.
So I did hear there's the mayor in Miami, and they have like Miami coin or something, and they are raising funds for the city, and it's just like a digital currency that they're using to fund the city.
Yeah, so I've heard of cities doing that. I've heard of cities selling digital currency, or cities selling, different coins or things like that. Traditionally, a city would sell a bond, right? A tax-free municipal bond or things like that. But because yields are so low, cities are trying to be creative and into how to raise funds for the needs of the cities. And I'm not sure that that's certainly in these manners. I haven't seen anything like that before. Certainly with the creation of the municipal bond, that was something new at that time, and that's been, I don't know, 100 years ago or so, since the creation of the municipal bond, and that was new at the time. But it'll be interesting to see, because I think people that are buying that now are betting not necessarily on the credentials of the city, but on the credentials of some other asset to see if that will go up as far as that goes. And so it turns into a different kind of investing than what a traditional investor might be involved in. So
super interesting, though. Also, this might tell you about the kind of TV I watch. Before we get there, this is Through the Pines, and we were talking about scary good money moves. These are actual like client scenarios. So I don't know why, but when I watch TV, I see a lot of reverse mortgage commercials. Also Cialis, so weird. But the reverse mortgage commercials are saying, hey, you should take a reverse mortgage loan out on your home. When should you do that? Are they a bad idea?
I think the answer to that is they're less of a bad idea than they used to be, but still a bad idea. I think they were a really, really bad idea back in the day. Now they're just a bad idea.
Yeah, but the person pitching it's famous.
No, you're right about that. And so really, when you're looking at doing reverse mortgage, we urge you to consider who is pitching it.
Is that like a last chance deal then, when you would use something like that as your kind of out of options?
Most people, yes. Most people, it's when you're, you don't have quite enough money coming from retirement account, Social Security to really make ends meet, and you say, hey, you know what, I don't need to leave an asset to my kids. I don't need, I just need to get by, or I want to, maybe spoil grandkids or whatever, and be able to see that. People will do that. I think the most important thing to remember on a reverse mortgage, which always seems to get overlooked, is it is a loan, right? People say, well, you're pulling your equity out of your home. This is your money. And while it is your equity, when you borrow against your home, which is what a reverse mortgage is, there's a set interest rate. So each dollar that you pull out of against your home, right? Take a loan against your home. Every dollar that you borrow is starting a compounding interest that will go for the life of that reverse mortgage. Probably the rest of your life until that home is sold. They build the reverse mortgages so that hopefully the equity in your home should outpace that compounding interest of the loan. However, it is a loan, right? And you have to understand that whatever money you pull out of a reverse mortgage, you're going to end up, paying interest on.
Very interesting. Okay, so I was thinking, what if you don't like your kids? You just don't want to leave them anything, so you're just gonna take out a reverse mortgage. Take that, kids. Should have been nice to your old man or whatever, or mom or whatever. Okay, so this is interesting too. I mean, a lot of people are becoming more savvy with real estate, and they're doing 1031 exchanges. So maybe we can explain what that is real quick. But then also, if it's closing in on 30 days and they haven't been able to identify a property, now what?
This is a case that came before us earlier this year, right? And so we were working with a client, and they didn't wrap us in. So it's kind of a newer client. They didn't wrap us in right out of the gate as far as what they were doing and when they were selling their real estate. And so, at this point, when you sell real estate, there's a tax code out there known as a 1031 real estate exchange, to where you have the ability, if it's an investment property, you have the ability to roll your cost from one property to another of like kind without having to pay the capital gains on that. So even though you're selling a property, an investment property, you're trying to avoid capital gains on the sale of that property because it's appreciated. And so through this 1031, you're allowed to do that. There's a lot of rules that go into play in 1031 exchanges. One of them is that you have 45 days to identify an exchange property from the sale of your property. So your money, you sell a business building or you sell a rental property, and your money upon that sale has to go to what's called a qualified financial intermediary. So a financial institution, it's kind of like it's going into escrow. If you take possession of it, then you have capital gains, immediately. And so it has to stay with this qualified intermediary. And then from that point forward, you have 45 days to identify a property. If you don't identify a property within the 45 days and let that intermediary know, then again, you're going to be subject to capital gains. And so in this particular case, we were dealing with significant capital gains. And so we're talking about, that it was farmland that had been inherited when he was a young man. And so he was about 25 when he had inherited it. He'd inherited the value at that time, might have been $100,000 or so. And here we are now, reaching in his 60s, the property's worth, maybe $3 or $4 million at this point. And so the capital gains from that 100,000 to 3 to 4 million is significant. And so had he been able to identify a property within that 45 days, then we could have exchanged that and avoided all those capital gains, because that's going to be taxed at the highest capital gain rate, 20%, plus the state income tax for the state that he lived in. And so he's going to lose a quarter of that in taxes, whereas we probably could have structured it to avoid that. In this case, we could have, probably gotten a step up at his passing and avoided all capital gains altogether and all income taxes on it. And so that's probably about $700,000 in taxes that's going to have to be paid now. And so that's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, don't wait. Contact planwithbaxter.com and your CPA to figure out what you can do to protect yourself. I know I was dropping off paperwork at my CPA's office, and there was an older couple in the office, and they had I walked in at the moment where they were saying, like, I guess we got to pay a lot of money, essentially. Like, why is there anything you can do? And then they left, and then my CPA looked at me and was like, they inherited like millions. Like, there's nothing I can do. Like, he's just doing the math. He's doing his job. So talk to a financial planner first and see if there's anything you can do to cut that off at the pass, right?
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't cost anything to have a conversation with us. Right. And so, give us a call. Let's run through your situation and see what you're planning on doing. And then let's evaluate those pros and cons and see if that's the best way. And it very well may be that that's the best way. But if not, then let's know in advance so that we can plan for it and figure out what the best way might be for you. At the end of the day, it's your money and your decision. It's not our money. It's not our decision. But it's our role to make sure that you understand the pros and cons of your decision so that you can make better financial decisions in the future than what you're making today. So.
Okay, but what about a little bit of diving into other people's money? If you are a small business owner and you have some employees you'd like to take care of, should you start a 401k or retirement plan for your business to help your employees? How does that work? Yes.
All right, next question.
Okay, so what would be bad about doing something like that? Because it sounds like, well, yeah, you probably should, but why wouldn't you? Maybe the company doesn't make enough or not big enough?
Yeah, so it's really not size of the company. It comes down to expense, right? That's always the question on a business owner's mind. And so, I had one recently where we looked, we look at the full scope, right? We can do everything from a 401k clear down to just an individual IRA. as far as what you want to do. And so it usually comes down to what's the goal, right? Are we trying to save for your retirement as a business owner? And if so, there might be a couple, paths that work well, or are you trying to provide a benefit for employees? If you're trying to provide a benefit for employees, but you're worried about the costs of that, we can look at a simple IRA, which, really most of the cost is just simply that 3% match that you'll need to offer employees, right? So you take your payroll times it by 0.03, find that 3%. And worst case scenario, if everyone participates and gets their full match, this is what you're out, right? All the way up to a 401k that has some administration costs, other things like that, but can be beneficial, right? To allowing you to save more for retirement. That Roth 401k is really, really favorable. And so I think when it comes to retirement plans and deciding whether you want to start one or not to be more competitive in the workplace, whatever that reason is, there's so many options, so many different ways to set them up. And really a conversation is so easy to have. Like Rex said, you can call us. There's no cost for an initial consultation. And we can walk you through kind of the pros and cons of a SEP IRA, a simple IRA, a traditional IRA, a Roth IRA, a 401k, an individual K, right? There's so many different things that probably should be a podcast in and of itself. But yeah, those are just kind of my
So
thoughts.
that 3% that the company matches, that comes out as an expense for the company. So if you're cash flow heavy and you're just looking to expense a few things, that's an option, I guess.
Yeah, you could do that. But I mean, obviously, we'd rather just take it and pay a little bit extra tax on it, right? If you're looking for more cash flow. However, a lot of times people, it's just nice to have a retirement plan. Not only to say you have a retirement plan, but it helps employees feel like they're working not at a means to an ends job, right? That they've got somewhere that this could be a long-term strategy for them that they can see retiring at down the road from that job, and adding some sort of 401k or retirement plan can be beneficial that way.
Well, that wasn't very scary, Brandon. That was pretty easy.
I'll come up with a more scary one next time.
Yeah. Okay. So this one's scary. I'm gonna toss this one to Rex just because I think you would appreciate this. Rex, guess what?
What?
You are being offered an early retirement package. You're done.
Oh, thank
You're
you.
done. Yep.
Thank you.
You gonna take it?
Well, what am I going to do tomorrow?
I don't know.
This comes back to Dan's.
I don't know.
This comes back to Dan's question, right?
Yeah.
And that could be scary. That can be scary. If all of a sudden you're working,
You're like, what do I do? Twiddling the thumbs. Yeah.
Right. You're sitting here twiddling the thumbs. You're thinking, okay, before they come into your office and say, hey, we want you to be gone tomorrow or next month or whatever the early out package is, you're thinking, I'm going to retire in 5 years or 6 years. And so you kind of have this mental plan of, or you should be formulating kind of what this mental plan is going to look like. And, the first week I retire, I'm going to go and put all those light bulbs in that I've been avoiding for the last week. And I'm going to fix my garage door. Maybe I'll weed my front yard and, all these things that you've been putting off because you're too busy working. But that, you're done with all those basics in the first 30 days or 60 days. And then what? And so are you going to volunteer to charity? Are you going to travel? Are you going to do some sort of religious mission? Are you going to drive your wife insane? What are you going to do if you retire? And so, we were faced with this with a particular client this past month. There's a number of companies that are offering early out packages right now. It's interesting. And so he was offered this, and he's probably about 60-ish years old and was planning on working for about another 4 or 5 years. But it was a fairly good package. And so in this case, he's looking at getting income for 6 months as far as a severance package, healthcare benefits for a while. He'd get his vacation and sick time pay paid out to him, kind of things like this. And this particular client didn't need to work. He could retire. He's in a financial position to where, but I like what I'm doing. I enjoy, and that's what he would keep saying to me is I enjoy what I'm doing. And so what would I do? And I think that then it becomes, depending upon your financial situation, it becomes a psychological question for you as to what do you want to do? And some people don't have that option. Some people will be in the financial position to where, 6 months of a severance package, that's great, but I need 5 years of income,
Well, not that we're all professional athletes, but if you're an athlete your whole life and then suddenly your career comes to an end and you don't know who you are anymore. And so if you're working in the same profession for so long, 15, 20, 25 years, and all of a sudden you're not, then who are you? You have a little identity crisis. I would imagine something like that could happen.
Yeah, I mean, Dan probably has a good perspective on this, right? Because he can choose to work for another 5 or 6 years, but it'd be interesting, Dan. Probably not interesting, but what if the company came to you and said, "Hey, Dan, we'd like you to retire next week"? What would be going through your head at that point?
Yeah, it is an interesting question, because you when you're in your 30s, 40s, and even 50s, you spend your life saying, I just got to get to 65, just got to get to 66, just got to get to 62 or 70, whatever the number is. You have a number in mind. My number was 65. That happened 2 months ago. And once you get there, and I've seen this with a number of people in my life, friends that are the same age as me that I went to high school with. Once you get to the point where you can retire, sometimes you don't want to. Now, I know if you're 35, you don't understand what I'm talking about. That doesn't even compute with you. But sometimes when you get to the point where you actually can retire and financially you're fine, sometimes you don't want to. And I see this a lot. So that's why I said earlier, it's important that you have a plan, not only for a financial plan, which is really, really important, because then you have the choice whether you do or you don't. But if someone came to me and said I needed to retire next week, I would actually be upset about it, because I am enjoying what I'm doing with my team here and with my clients. And I frankly don't think my wife's ready for me to retire. I don't think that she wants me here at 9:30 in the morning in her space, and we've been married 43, 44 years. So you've got to have a mental plan in addition to a financial plan, and it really is a mental plan, and that's part of getting yourself prepared for retirement.
Like mentally prepared for retirement, not just financially.
Mentally prepared. Retirement 30 or 40 years ago meant that at 65, you quit working and you were done. And that's how most people looked at retirement. Retirement for the people that are my age doesn't mean you're done. What it means is I'm going to do something else. I'm going to do something fun. I'm going to do something that I care about, or a charity, or a service, or some other thing that I really enjoy, may or may not get paid to do that. That's what retirement looks like for most of the people that I know and my friends that are at that age.
Yeah. Brandon?
Yeah, I'd just add to that. I think Dan's absolutely right about retirement age and getting mentally prepared for that. But in addition to that, spending has that same effect. I had a client over the last month that they were way in front of the eight ball. They had saved their whole life like crazy and are still saving incredible numbers. And we sat down and reviewed their plan with them. And I said, look, you've got to either spend less today or spend more today, save less today, go out and live a little bit more, or your retirement, you're going to have to spend incredible amounts of money, or we're just going to have to leave all this money, down the road to someone, choose, or maybe we kind of blend all those together. And it was interesting talking to them several times after those conversations and them just saying, it's hard, right? It's hard to spend money. Now that we've been in this mindset of saving and building so much, it was emotionally trying for them. They wanted to, I could tell, but it was also emotionally difficult to get behind this idea of increasing lifestyle today. And so I think that's where financial planning is so valuable, is that it allows you to get in front of these big life changes emotionally before it happens, whether it's for good or for bad, so that you can be prepared for them when they come.
It is wild that it's a problem I never knew existed, but there are people out there who don't spend. They save so much money and they don't spend. And there was a podcast, it's the author of the 4 Hour Work Week, and he had this guest on, and the guest's job is to essentially teach people that it's okay to spend their money. That's okay. And then the other thing that I thought was very interesting is when Dan mentioned, yeah, you spend your whole life looking forward to 65 because you're going to do what exactly? Like what does that mean? So you're going to retire and do what? So that means you hate your job the whole time. And then, so you're looking forward to 65 where you don't have to do the job that you hate. So that sounds god awful. So then, why aren't we thinking about how we can improve the now while planning for later? Rex, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting because I'm gonna flip that coin just a little bit, right? So we have another client that has done a phenomenal job of saving, high income, has done a great job of saving, and so we're talking, that he's making well over $1 million a year for the last 20 years, and saving good portions of it, and things like that. He was probably spending, maybe on average of, and this is gonna shock some people, but maybe $20,000 a month on average, kind of thing, is kind of what his spending habits were. And so he would travel a lot. He had some expensive hobbies, things like that. And so here he was turning 55, and he's thinking, I've done a great job saving. I have a high stress job, high strung. I want to be done. And so we looked at the numbers, and at 20,000, we felt pretty good that wasn't an issue for him to continue. Even if it ballooned up to 25,000, that he would be in good shape. And so he retired. And then the question that Dan's talking about is, well, now what do I do? Well, what he did is his hobbies just went hyperactive, right? And so these expensive hobbies that he had took his spending within a year, from 20,000 a month to 50,000 a month that he's spending. And so, after about a year and a half of that, we sat down and we're looking at it along the way. And along the way, I'm like, that's a lot more than 25,000 that we'd kind of talked about, and, kind of holding his hand through that. And then it's starting to play psychological games on him of, oh my gosh, I'm not sure I can rein this in because now I'm kind of addicted to this lifestyle. And so after talking about it, we actually had him go back to work at age 57. And get re-engaged. Because he's so busy now with work, his spending has come back down. He's saving, and he's starting to kind of recognize some of those addiction habits as far as spending and hobbies and activities and things like that. But I think everybody is very, very unique as far as what their own habits are, what their biases are, what their background is, and how that's going to translate into living, whether they've saved their entire life and so now they can't get themselves to spend, which is probably the majority of people, or people that have pent up demand and haven't, they've saved a lot and they haven't been spending, and now all of a sudden, the barn doors open and they're going to spend everything they've got, and so It's interesting.
Everyone wants to win the lottery until they win the lottery. They don't know what to do. Essentially.
Right. And how many of those people, go on spending sprees and are bankrupt, 3 to 5 years later? You hear story after story because they aren't savers and they have this huge lump sum given to them. And so it's an interesting stat that people that inherit money that aren't savers, aren't used to investing, typically the average inheritance lasts 18 months until it's spent. And it doesn't really amount to the dollar amount. It doesn't matter for the dollar amount. It could be, $100,000, it could be $3 million. But if your habits are such that you don't understand money and you're not used to dealing with money, then chances are you're going to blow right through it.
That's so wild. Okay, anything else you guys have seen recently that we should touch on before we wrap the podcast this week? These are scary, good money moves that we've seen, like cold cases, like actual client issues that you've dealt with. Dan.
Yeah, I think it's important that as you think about this and you get to the point of this in your life, that you and your spouse, you have a plan together. Because I had a situation many years ago where a client owned a company, did great with his company, made a lot of money. And his wife was there at home raising the kids, helping to raise the kids. He sold his company, had plenty of money, and then come to find out that his wife was spending, which he had no idea, $50,000 to $80,000 a month. It got to a point where it was $200,000 a month. And it became a major stress for him in his life, and her also, because he was putting pressure on her. But it was something she was used to, spending a lot of money and not having a budget. So you need to have a plan. You need to work together as spouses to make sure that you're on the same page with that plan. Yeah. Men and women think about money very differently, and that's okay. But you need to make sure that you're aligned as to what does it look like after retirement based on what we've done in our whole lives.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure if I gave my wife $200,000 a month to spend, she would spend $200,000 a month. I don't know how, but she would figure it out, and it'd probably all be on the kids. Rex, you know how to spend. Rex, what's it like to spend $200,000 a month?
I'm going to Disneyland. No, I'm just kidding. I have no idea what that feels like. That's a lot of those big turkey legs, right? That you get there. So many turkey legs. I don't know. The one thing that I do know is, people never cease to surprise me at their innate ability to spend every dollar that they bring in. And so,
hey, that's a skill, man. Yeah.
Mad talents. Yeah. And so I do think, Dan brings up a big
you're
point.
referring to high incomes because it's easy to do when you don't make a lot of money. But when you're making so much money that you can burn through $200,000 a month and it doesn't break you completely, that is wild to me.
Yeah, it is, because you think, well, how much stuff do I need? And lots of times they're chasing memories, or they're chasing, an experience, or it can become an addiction, right? Spending addiction and things like that you have to be a little bit careful of. But I think it's, they talk about the three most common reasons for divorce, right? And money is right there at the top of the list. And so I think if you're not on the same page with your spouse, like Dan was saying, and you're not having those discussions as you're nearing retirement, it's easy to blow up a retirement. And then you have resentment, you have hard feelings. A number of years ago, we went through this with a client, and here we are, 75 years old, and we're going through a divorce after, 45, 50 years of marriage, because all of a sudden they just have so much resentment to each other that they've started to deal with their finances completely independent, and it just became such a thorn that they just couldn't stand being in the same room as each other anymore. And so, we want to be marriage savers. Can I say that? But we want to sit here and just make sure that people are educated on not only how to handle your money and your investments and the planning, but sometimes we turn into counselors. I can't remember what your degree is in, Dan, but there's a small possibility it could be in psychology, and talking about, the psychology of investing, and how many times you're a counselor of psychology as opposed to a money counselor. Wouldn't you agree?
That is correct. That is very correct. It's money adds, health is very, very important to people in their lives, but next to that is obviously their grandkids, because my grandkids mean more to me than anything. But money is right there too, and it can either be a joy and happiness in life if you have your priorities straight, or it can be a major stress and a problem with your life if you don't. So it's very important to think through all of these things.
Well, I really enjoyed this episode, talking to you guys, getting to know what you guys deal with on a daily basis. It's super interesting to me. So if you have questions, or you'd like to hear more or chat with, get in touch with Brandon, Dan, or Rex, visit planwithbaxter.com. Anything else before we take off? See shaking heads.
I don't think so. Happy Halloween to everybody. We love doing the podcast. We'd love to see your feedback either on the Facebook page or shoot us a personal email through our websites as far as that goes. I think the thing to take away from this podcast is, whether you're dealing with Social Security and some unique aspect, whether it's being a widow, whether it's being the windfall elimination provision that we discussed, whether we're talking about receiving major lump sums or real estate exchanges, is talk to us early, make the call, and have a conversation. Even though this is a scary podcast, we're not that scary. We're pretty approachable. We're pretty easygoing, and we would love to talk to you.
Yeah. Except for, your wife uses buys those giant skeletons and puts them in the front yard, and that's kind of scary. I don't know about that.
Yeah, our yard is scary, and so it's she talk about addictions. So she's got a little Halloween addiction.
That's where the 200,000 went. Now we know. I get it.
Now we know.
Dan, final words.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about these things with the other members of our team, and we're happy to help. Happy to help. Please make that call. Let us help you.
Yeah, right on. All right, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Banyan Collective on YouTube as not to miss another Through the Pines podcast. Again, this is Through the Pines, reminding you to use yesterday's dollars to finance tomorrow's dreams.